Shalom, Israel. Grace and blessings from God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, be unto you. All praises to the Most High that we made another week learning the Word. And it would seem that we're live on, at least on my end. Let me make sure that we're live on y'all's end real quick, and then we'll get started. Let me see. How we looking? Are we live? Let me see. Okay, it appears so. All praises to the Most High. Let's check Facebook. If we're live on YouTube, we should be live on Facebook as well. Where we at? Come on now. It says we're live. Let's see. Okay, all praises to the Most High. It would appear so. Okay, so praise the Most High. Yeah, let me cut this on silent. I forgot to cut it on silent. There we go. All right. So with that, we're picking up, as you can tell from the title, we're picking up right where we left off from last week, talking about the Northern Kingdom tribes and the breakdown of the tribes. And it would appear this is going to go 3 parts, just talking about the Northern Kingdom. And it would make sense because we spent one hour and a half to an hour and 40 minutes talking about the Southern Kingdom, which is just 3 tribes. It would make sense that talking about the other 9 tribes, we'd do 3 times as much time. So with that, before we get started, in 2 Timothy 2, as we start every week, verse 15, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And see, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to rightly divide the word of truth. Not just the scriptures, obviously that's the foundation, but going through these other books as well, trying to find the truth that's in them versus the lies. All right, and it's important to know biases, as I say every time we go through some of these books. With that being said, we're not even really going to get into the specifics of every tribe breakdown. All right. We'll do some this week, we'll do some next week. But just to recap what we talked about last week. We talked about the Israelite-Phoenician connection, particularly with the Olmecs, right? With the landing in Brazil, evidenced by the Paraiba stone. And then we talked about the Olmecs, right? So when talking about Issachar and Zebulun, that's who the Olmecs were. They were Issachar and Zebulun. Olmecs were the forefathers of the Toltecs. I don't know if I went into that last week, but when you look at in 1 Chronicles chapter 7, I believe I did hit that one. Maybe I didn't. Either way, we're going to look at it real quick, talking about the Toltecs. In 1 Chronicles chapter 7, starting with verse 1, it says, Now the sons of Issachar were Tola and Pua, Jashub, and Shimron 4. So Tola being the firstborn of Issachar, that's where the Toltecs get their name from. All right, they named a city Tulan after their forefather Tola, and became the Toltecs, as in the descendants of Tola. Then it goes on to list his descendants here. All right, so more specifically and in more modern prophecy, I guess you would say, in Genesis 49. And even before we get that, let's talk about with the recap of what we talked about last week. We looked at the Olmec heads and how they all were the same people, but they all had varying features. And, we read about Ivan von Sertima tried to attribute this to having 3 different ancestors, and really it's just one people that mixed themselves among the other nations. All right. And you see that here in Hosea 7 and 8 when talking about the Northern Kingdom, when talking about Northern Kingdom Israelites. And Hosea 7 and verse 8, it says, Ephraim, he hath mixed himself among the people, right? So Ephraim, the Northern Kingdom, mixed with the other people more than the Southern Kingdom did. Not that the Southern Kingdom didn't, because we have a history that shows that they did, but Ephraim was more likely to do those things. All right, it says Ephraim is a cake not turned, meaning the same way that if you don't turn a cake over, you're gonna have one burnt side and one very light side. All right. So as I said, he hath mixed himself among the people, and we even give scriptural evidence for this last week when talking about how Ahab married the Canaanite Jezebel, right? So it was very prominent among the northern kingdom to mix among other people, right? And that's one of the main reasons why when you go to Jeremiah 12 and verse 9, Jeremiah 12 and verse 9. It says, my heritage, meaning God's people, is unto me as a speckled bird, right? If you look at, let me just look up an image of a speckled bird real quick. It'll show you what most speckled bird looks like, what most speckled birds look like, excuse me. What most speckled birds look like, see, they're mostly brown, but then they got patches of white in there, got white dots, right? Mostly brown, but then got a little white in them. Some are more, what's the word I'm looking for? More, I guess, flamboyant with all sorts of colors, greens and purples and blues and whatnot. But it's mostly like brown with white patches and things like that. And some are white with brown patches, you know. Speckled bird is many colors on the bird, right? It's got a lot of appearances, and it's very obviously spotted, right? My heritage is unto me as a speckled bird. The birds round about are against her. Come, ye assemble all the beasts of the field, come to devour, right? It's easily spotted for the enemies to attack, right? So, in Genesis 49, when specifically talking about Issachar and Zebulun, we'll go ahead and talk about them since we talked about the Olmecs last week, and then we'll get into some other prophecies and historical references. All right, in Genesis 49, coming down to verse 13, we're talking about Zebulun. Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea. All right, so the haven of the sea over here in the west is the Panama Canal, right? So just north of that is where you have Central America, all right? He shall be for a haven of ships, and his border shall be unto Zidon. Zidon was the maritime trading effort and was the maritime trading location in ancient times. And if you look on any kind of map, Zebulun's border did not stretch all the way to the ancient Sidon, right? So this is prophecy about what would be in the last days, right? There'd be much maritime trade among Zebulun, all right? Issachar is a strong ass couching down between two burdens, right? And if you look at what's going on with Mexico right now, you have the burden of either you stay in Mexico and you get pretty much oppressed by the cartel that is run by people to the south, which would be like Colombians, right? Run from Colombia all the way up through unto Mexico, right? Or you move to the north where you have, Americans, where you can become a servant unto tribute, as it goes on to say. And he saw that rest was good and the land that it was pleasant, right? Mexico is actually very pleasant. The resources of Mexico are very rich, right? You go down, you get into like rainforest and things like that. And bowed his shoulder to bear, became a servant unto tribute, right? So that's what you see here in America with the so-called Mexicans becoming servants over here, all right? And let me just go ahead and pull, I did pull my camera down, right? Yes, but let me just go ahead and pull up these, let me go ahead and pull up these 12 tribes charts so that y'all can see them. I'll talk about both sides. Get out of here. Where's Drive? There we go. Y'all bear with me for just 1 second. All right, let's get out of this and go to, there's Deuteronomy 28 flyer, but I ain't looking at that. I'm looking at this. All right. Y'all bear with me 1 second so I can pull this up real quick. Pull up this one. And I'll pull up this one as well. just so y'all can write this down if y'all don't have it, so y'all can understand where I'm coming from. And I haven't really even talked about the history of the East, those in the Pacific who are also Israelites. I'll talk about that at some point. And I'm about to touch on Zebulun and Issachar now, but I'll get more into that probably next week. Let's zoom out a little so y'all can see it a little better. All right. Can't open this file. Shut up. Y'all forgive me. I should have remembered to pull this up before I went live. There we go. Okay. And it's gonna keep messing with me the whole time, just because that's how Google does. But anyway, so the 12 tribes, as I'm describing the 12 tribes in the West, your Zebulonites would be your Central Americans, the descendants of the Mayans and other various tribes in that region, in that area. Issachar would be your Mexicans and your Aztecs, actually the descendants of the Toltecs, right, which would be descendants of all throughout Mexico. Aztecs were just the greatest empire of those peoples. And 12 tribes in the East, I'll go ahead and touch on them now since I just read both the prophecies in Genesis 49. I'll discuss for them as well. Issachar are the Filipino people, and the Zebulons are the Indonesians, all right, from Sumatra to East Timor. So, again, Issachar is a strong ass couching down between two burdens. So the burdens that I described for Mexico, right, it's similar in that they still fit the prophecy over there as far as the Philippines. But the two burdens that they have is either, you become a servant to China or you become a servant to the U.S. And the U.S. and China and even Japan at one point was really fighting over the Philippine Islands. All right. And he saw that rest was good, the land that it was pleasant, bowed his shoulder to the bear, became a servant unto tribute. Right. So also, I haven't got this pulled up, but look into the history of the slave ships that went back and forth from Mexico to the Philippines. All right, they went back and forth, as in they brought the Spaniards, when they ruled both those areas, they would take slaves from Mexico to take them over to the Philippines, and vice versa. They would bring slaves from the Philippines to work on plantations in Mexico. They did it both ways. All right. So even if you're going to say, well, the indigenous over in the Philippines, that's not Issachar. Well, guess what? There's hundreds of thousands descent of Issachar in the Philippines. All right. No matter how you look at it, they went both ways with it. They sent hundreds of thousands both ways, or at least tens of thousands both ways. All right. And now there's like 1 million quote unquote Filipino descent people in Mexico. All right. Because again, that slave trade went both ways. All right. So Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea. He shall be for a haven of ships. All right. Indonesia, it's pretty obvious that they have been subjected from the Muslims during the Middle Ages on into the Dutch and the French throughout colonial time period, even on up to today. All right. That's the haven of ships. There's just a whole bunch of islands. All the ships, they have to, if they want to do maritime trade in the East, they have to go through that region. All right. Same way that if over here in the West, if you want to do any kind of maritime trade from the East to the West, then you got to go through the Panama Canal. All right. And his border shall be unto Zidon. Again, a maritime trading peoples. All right. So specifically when talking about the West over here, let's get Deuteronomy 33, because I got Genesis 49 pulled up. Let's get Deuteronomy 33. When talking about the descendants of the Olmecs, all right, because the Olmecs was when Issachar and Zebulun was together, and then they split up and became various other tribes, including the Mayans and the Toltecs. All right. We read about that last week when talking about Mesoamerica. In Deuteronomy 33. So the same type of thing, except one's the blessings from Jacob, one's the blessing from Moses to the 12 tribes. All right. So again, talking about Issachar and Zebulun. It says, and of Zebulun, he said, rejoice, Zebulun, in thy going out, and Issachar in thy tents. All right. They shall call the people into the mountain. There they shall offer sacrifices of righteousness, for they shall suck of the abundance of the seas and of the treasures hid in the sand. Right. Great resources in Mexico and Central America. But it talks about how originally they were on one accord. All right. And they would have their sacrifices, like the feast days, the sacrifices of righteousness on the feast days in the Yucatan, all right? They call it the Yucatan because that's the same as the Hebrew word for Joktan, which means a small dispute. All right, there was a small dispute on whether the Yucatan belonged to Issachar or belonged to Zebulun, all right? Because that's where they would both come to keep the feast, all right? And originally, on them temples, them pyramids that they had built out there, like Tiwanaku, Teotihuacan, all those areas, they would, originally, they were good sacrifices being offered there. Eventually, it turned into them sacrificing people, all right? And of course, that is in the scriptures as well. But originally, they were offering sacrifices of righteousness there. They were keeping the feast days, they were doing what they were supposed to, but they fell off eventually, all right? In the book of Hosea, when you want prophecy concerning the northern kingdom of Israel, Hosea is usually the place to go to because he was a northern kingdom prophet. Not to say that there were no other northern kingdom prophets, like Jonah was a northern kingdom prophet as well, but Hosea, there's like 14 chapters in Hosea. He talks a lot about the northern kingdom and what would happen to them. I believe it's Hosea 8, could be Hosea 9. Let's see. Here we go. Starting with verse 11. Starting with verse 11, he says, because Ephraim, meaning the northern kingdom in general, hath made many altars to sin, altars shall be unto him to sin, right? So because that sinful nature was still among us, those altars, even though originally we built them in righteousness, they became sin to us. I have written to him the great things of my law, but they were counted as a strange thing. And we're actually going to get into some writings of some of the people who came over here and viewed the quote-unquote natives, that as time goes on, we got worse and worse, all right? But they were counted as a strange thing. They sacrifice flesh for the sacrifice of mine offerings and eat it, right? So everybody's heard of the Mayans and the Aztecs cutting open a person, pulling out the heart and eating it, all right? That's what it ended up being. Originally, it was sacrifice of righteousness on those temples, but eventually it turned into a sinful thing. It turned into human sacrifice, all right? But the Lord accept them not. Obviously, God's not going to accept that. Now will he remember their iniquity and visit their sins. They shall return to Egypt, right? Meaning they're going back into captivity, all right? That's what Spain came over here, put the people in captivity, as I just described with the slave trade back and forth between Mexico and the Philippines. For Israel has forgotten his maker and buildeth temples. You see that right there? So all those temples built up, that was all Israelites that did that. All right, throughout Central America, throughout Mexico and Central America. And Judah hath multiplied fenced cities, but I will send a fire upon his cities, and it shall devour the palaces thereof. Right? So the fall of both Judah and Israel. All right. So from there, let's talk about what I want to get into. Yeah, let's go to. I don't really necessarily know what order I want to do this in. So I talked about this last week, but I kind of want to touch on it again because we're gonna focus on this a little bit. In 2nd Ezra 13, all right. 2nd Ezra 13. We talked about this last week. 40 through 45. This lets you know how the people got over here. And it even says, and we'll touch on this a little bit earlier, but it says that they might there keep their statutes, which they never kept in their own land, right? So that's why the people originally came over here, was to keep the commandments that we had never been able to keep in our own land, far away from the heathen, right? But we eventually went off. But with that being said, we're kind of going to pump the brakes just a little bit. And this is a book by Ronald Sanders called Lost Tribes and Promised Lands. I want to look this up real quick just to show y'all what the cover looks like. Because I don't have the book, or at least I can't find it. It's online. You can buy it online, but I used to have a copy. I may have given it away or whatever. But that's what it looks like. That's what the modern versions look like that you can buy. Older versions look like that. All right. But yeah. So page 74 starts the chapter talking about Christopher Columbus, and it goes on to say that he kind of has a mysterious origin, in that, oh come on, I just lost my place. He kind of has a mysterious origin, in that he's said to be from Italy, from Genoa, but it's kind of dubious, in that there is a record of his parents, or his dad rather, and his brothers, but that's it. And he kind of just pops up out of nowhere. And his own records, he doesn't really write in Italian, he writes in Spanish. So that's what has. So here we go. Enter Columbus on page 74. So that's what has Ronald Sanders kind of questioning his Italian origin. But it very well could be that, he was just illiterate in Italy, and he didn't really learn how to read and write until he learned to read and write in Spain. That's also very possible. He doesn't really include that, but that's also a possibility. He's kind of trying to present the point that Columbus was a Jew who had secretly converted to Christianity, because there's a lot of that going on at the time. I don't buy into that, but that is something that he postures here. But he says here, and I gotta zoom in because I can't really see it. He says, but before we proceed to find other possible ramifications of a new Christian identity in Columbus, it should be pointed out that all arguments in favor of this hypothesis are purely circumstantial, right? So he says, look, it's circumstantial. Then he goes on to say that doesn't necessarily mean it's not true, but it pretty much does. It's all pretty much circumstantial. But I'm just going to get down to the point, talking about his fascination with the book of Second Esdras, right? Because I talked about that last week when I showed you the entry in the Jewish Encyclopedia, that he was kind of fascinated with, not even his fascination with his book, or rather the book of Second Esdras, but rather his identifying America with the land of Arsareth. All right, as we read here, is that and the same region is called Arsareth, right? He identified America with that land. Whenever you look in the Jewish Encyclopedia, as you can see here, Arsareth. And I pointed this out last week, but I'm just kind of going a little further to show you he had a fascination with the book of Ezra. All right, it says when you look at Arsareth, it says the name of the land beyond the great river, far away from the habitation of man, in which the 10 tribes of Israel will dwell, observing the laws of Moses until the time of the restoration, according to 4th Esdras 13 and 45. That's what they refer to as 2nd Esdras. Columbus identified America with this land, right? So this this section of the book just goes on to say that he's pretty much fascinated with the book of Esdras, right? It says, a striking element in Columbus's geographical religiosity in his intense and abiding interest in the 4th or 2nd book of Esdras, the 2 apocryphal books of Esdras, purport to be additional writings by and about the Old Testament Ezra. But the 2nd or 4th book is a piece of full-fledged Hellenistic apocalyptic writing that was often regarded with suspicion by the church and just as often embraced by the heterodox. Augustine had given guarded approval to Esdras' prophetic claims, and much was always to be made of this by the latter's defenders, including Columbus, right? So Columbus was a defender of the book of 2nd Esdras, claiming it to be legit, right? And not pseudepigraphal, right? So including Columbus in the marginal notes to Columbus's copy of daily is a relatively lengthy discourse on 2 Ezra 6 and 42, which reads, upon the third day thou did command that the waters should be gathered up in the seventh part of the earth. 6 parts hast thou dried up, and kept them to the intent that of these some being planted of God until might serve thee. This was often to be cited by Columbus, who argued that since only 1/7 of the world was water, a good deal more dry land than yet was known remained to be discovered overseas, right? So Columbus used the book of 2 Ezra to basically posture this claim that, hey, look, there's more land that y'all ain't really touching on over there in the West. Let's see. But Columbus seems to have found more in Esdras than just this geographical argument. Here's one of the things he writes about this verse in his marginal notes. But this prophecy is not accepted by the reprobate Jews, yet it has been accepted by the innumerable ones among them who have believed in the Gospels. Israel has thus been split into 2 branches, a division predicted as inevitable by the prophet Samuel to King Saul. The reprobate Jews themselves hold Esdras, that is the Old Testament Ezra, as a canonical authority. This sudden display of interest in Jewish matters is startling and weighs considerably in favor of the argument that Columbus was a new Christian. And I would say the exact opposite, because he's not speaking of the Jews as if he is a member of them himself, but rather he's speaking of them as an outsider. What it certainly does, at any rate, is establish a racial viewpoint on the Judeo-Christian tradition that is rather unprecedented, though certainly in keeping of the spirit of the times. But the assertion is that there are now 2 kinds of Jews in the world, those who have seen the light of the Christian revelation and those who have not, but that even the former, baptized though they may be, still are Jews. Indeed, the reference to Samuel's prophecy established a parallel with the divided kingdom of the Old Testament, and thereby gives to the new Christians the role of the southern kingdom of Judah as the keeper of the great tradition. But if that is the case, then what is the role of the rest of the Christian world, non-Jewish in descent? The ethnocentrism here is extreme, and he's talking about the racial elements of this, because the subtitle of, or the subheading, I should say, of Lost Tribes and Promised Lands is the origins of racism in America. So the whole book pretty much talks about the racial context of the times and why people held the beliefs that they did and things like that. So he's talking about ethnocentrism here. Along with this racial Christianity is an idea of revelation that places the mystical Esdras right at the center. For the note is saying that the acceptance of the apocryphal Esdras as valid prophecy is what distinguishes the new Christians from the reprobate Jews, who reject him even though they regard the Old Testament Ezra, the same person in Columbus's eyes, as canonical authority, right? So Columbus is saying, hey, look, why are y'all not regarding this book of Ezra, but y'all regard the other books of Ezra, all right? So in other words, to repudiate the vision of the apocryphal Esdras is as if to repudiate the Jehovah of the prophets, and presumably the result will be the same. The rabbinical Jews of Spain, the note seems to imply, are to be the lost tribes of modern times. Again, I don't know how you could read this excerpt from Columbus's manuscripts and posture that he himself is a Jew, because it seems like he would rather use this to expel the Jews from Spain, right, and to further the Inquisitions, as we know happened in the same year that he came over here to the West, right, in 1492. So it's odd how Ronald Sanders could hold that belief and know what this manuscript says. One wonders whether this note was written before or after the expulsion of the Jews in 1492. It would seem that it was probably written beforehand. But meanwhile, the apocryphal Esdras, which was, by the way, a book of special importance to many new Christians, has a good deal to say about the original lost tribes, and this could not have passed lightly under Columbus's somewhat mystical gaze. Surely he saw special meanings for his own times and for himself in this passage in 2 Esdras 13. This is verses 2 through 5. And lo, there arose a wind from the sea, that had moved all the waves thereof. And I beheld, and lo, that man waxed strong with the thousands of heaven. And when he turned his countenance to look, all things trembled that were seen under him. And whensoever the voice went out of his mouth, all they burned that heard his voice, like as the earth faileth when it filled the fire. And after this I beheld, and lo, there was gathered together a multitude of men out of number from the four winds of the heaven to subdue that man that came out of the sea. Right. So that's that's the prophecy about Christ coming back and how the other nations are going to try to fight against him, being gathered over there for World War III. But, and I'm picking up with the readings here, but this warlike multitude is subdued by the man from the sea, and then another multitude, a peaceable one, comes to him, whereof some were glad, some were sorry, some of them were bound, and others some brought of them that were offered. That is, brought him slaves from their midst. How could the exaltedly visionary Columbus not have seen an image of himself in this? Certainly after his voyages of American discovery, but perhaps even earlier after making some voyages to the Guinea coast during his young years in Portugal. Right, so Ronald Sanders is making the case that Columbus viewed himself as messianic, right? He viewed himself as like a godlike type figure. All right. If Columbus did indeed glimpse himself in the role of the man from the sea, then Esdras' identification of the peaceable multitude takes on special significance, right? And this, he's going on to 40 through 42, what I have pulled up over here. Those are the 10 tribes which were carried away prisoners out of their own land in the time of Hosea the king, whom carried them, whom Salmanessar the king of Assyria led away captive, and he carried them over the waters, and so came they into another land. But they took this counsel among themselves, that they would leave the multitude of the heathen and go forth into a further country where never mankind dwelt, that they might there keep their statutes which they never kept in their own land. Ezra's interpretation of the peaceable multitude then goes on to say, come on now, I just jumped ahead a little bit, y'all forgive me. I accidentally clicked on it. All right. Goes on to say that the lost tribes enter into Euphrates by the narrow passages of the river, which they were able to ford because God stopped the flow of the river, right? God stopped the flow of the waters for them, and then traveled another year and a half to a region called Arsareth, evidently a Greek corruption of the Hebrew Aretz and Ahareth, another country. There they were to remain until the latter time, and now when they shall begin to come, the highest shall stay the springs of the stream again, that they may go through. Therefore sawest thou the multitude with peace. We are already familiar with much of this terrain. As for the man from the sea, Esdras identifies him in 1326 as he whom God the highest hath kept a great season, which by his own self shall deliver his creature. In other words, the Messiah, right? And that's what I just explained, that man in the vision in 2 Esdras 13 is actually Christ. Did Columbus have any messianic pretensions? There is a decidedly messianic element in Las Casas' literary treatment of him years after his death, but that could be more Las Casas than Columbus. The discoverer himself clearly was a man of enormous ambition, lofty conviction, and unshakable confidence in his own destiny. And though these traits alone hardly make for a messianic pretender, they are, given his mystical streak and the messianic ardor of the age, a step in that direction. It is well known that he developed in his writings and correspondence certain symbolic flourishes of virtually mystical, one is tempted to say Kabbalistic import, such as his remarkable signature, right? So I'm not going to read the rest of this, but it goes on to talk about what happened as far as from 1485 to 1492 to get him his trip over here, all right? So with that, he does make a compelling case that Columbus, not only did he know about the book of 2 Esdras and referred to it, but also more than likely had a messianic complex, and came over here with such revelry. All right. So this is a good book to look into. That's not the only thing that I'm gonna show from this book. Also on page, I believe it's 364. Yeah, let me find it for a second. Let me find it. It talks about the people that were over here, all right? And it goes on from the Middle Ages to basically the modern day, or at least to the colonial time period of the idea of race and racism, where it came from and what it ended up being. But obviously, I'm just picking the parts out of this that are highlights that pique the interest of this specific lesson. So I'm gonna start on page. I guess this would be page 363. I want to start on. It's a lost tribe discovered in New York. When it's not actually about discovering the lost tribe in New York. It's more about, or at least what we're talking about is more about what happened before then. In September of 1644, a Portuguese Marrano. Now, Marrano means a Jew or Moor who converted to Christianity, oftentimes in name only, but basically forcibly converted during the times of the Inquisition, right? So that's what a Marrano means. A Portuguese Marrano named Antonio de Montesinos arrived in Amsterdam after having lived for some years in South America and proceeded to tell the leaders of the recently established Jewish community there, meaning in Amsterdam, a story that caused them to think of him as a latter-day Eldad the Danite. 2.5 years before, he told them while traveling in the wild mountains of Quito, I think that's what that says. I have to zoom in a little more because I can't hardly see this. He had heard some of his Indian guides remark that the natives of that country deserved all the suffering they had undergone at the hands of the Spaniards. When he asked them to explain why they thought such a thing, they had replied mysteriously that it was because we so badly treated a holy people, the greatest in the world, right? So keep that in mind. The people in, as he said here in South America, had the mentality after they got conquered. They said, well, we deserve this because we had treated a holy people, the greatest in the world, had mistreated them or so badly treated them, right? Nothing more had been offered by them on this point, but later in the same conversation, Francisco, one of the Indian guides, had declared that his countrymen would be avenged upon the Spaniards in time anyway by means of a people now hidden. You see that right there? So even though he said, hey, we deserve what we're getting, eventually we're going to be avenged. All right? The two references apparently were to the same people. But Montesinos, not seeing their full meaning in that moment, had put the whole matter out of mind for the time being. Upon his return to Cartagena, the Judaizing, y'all see that word, Montesinos had found himself accused by the Inquisition and put in prison. Praying for salvation in his cell one day, he was reciting what was by then a standard formula among New World Marranos. Blessed be the name of the Lord, who has not made me an idolater, a barbarian, a Negro, an Indian. When suddenly he stopped. Those Indians, he told himself, they are Hebrews. All right, so this Portuguese Marrano, Antonio de Montesinos, himself believed those Indians, as he proclaimed, to be Hebrews. All right. Pondering this thought incredulously and yet with growing conviction, he resolved that if he ever was released, he would seek out the Indian Francisco and try to learn the truth. Montesinos' story, unclear as to the circumstances of his incarceration, is equally unclear as to those of his release, right? So we don't know much about how he got arrested or how he got released. Just before and after, I suppose. All right. But released he was, and he immediately went to Francisco. Revealing himself as a Jew, Montesinos proclaimed his conviction that Francisco's hidden people were of the same race as he. Would Francisco lead him to them? He said, look, I'm a Jew also, so lead me to them. The two men were soon back in the rugged mountains in which Francisco had made his initial revelation, marching relentlessly for a week before they finally came to a halt. It was a Saturday. Montesinos makes a point of telling us, and they had come to a river larger than the Douro. I don't know what the Douro is. I guess it's a river in Spain or Portugal. Are there echoes of the Sambatian in all of this? Here, Francisco, oh come on. Francisco announced, is where your brothers will be seen, right? So here's where the Jews are, right? Basically. Waving a banner high in the air, the Indian guide soon was greeted by a puff of smoke far beyond the other bank of the river. In response to his signal, the two men waited. Eventually, a canoe appeared bearing 3 men and a woman, all of them Indians. So keep that in mind, all right? So these people who appear to them in this canoe, right? What is that? 3 men and a woman. They're all Indians, all right? They're all the same as the native people there. To the place where Francisco and Montesinos were standing at the water's edge, the woman got off and spoke to Francisco in an Indian tongue the Montesinos could not understand, although he could perceive that he was being identified in the conversation. She then turned to her male companions to explain the situation. Upon hearing her words, they arose, went over to Montesinos, and to his utter astonishment said, Shema Yisrael Adonai, what is it? Eloheinu Adonai Ehud. Right, so even that is a bit broken from even modern Hebrew standards, but it goes on to say what it means. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Right, so he's quoting Deuteronomy 6. Right, they had recited in Hebrew the fundamental credo of Judaism. Right, so that was kind of a greeting that they used. Obviously, hey, if you know this and you know the scripture, you must be Israelite. Right, so that's a greeting that those who knew who they were would say to one another, all right? And they would say the Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eli, Hinu Adonai Ehad, right? A brief conversation then ensued in their common ancestral tongue, according to Montesinos, whose fluency in it is almost as perplexing to the reader of his narrative as is that of his 3 mysterious new companions, right? So he's like, hey, we spoke in Hebrew. I don't know how they knew it, but we all knew Hebrew there. All right. They told him that they were themselves of the tribe of Reuben, and that the tribe of Joseph lived on an island nearby, right? So we see here that these Hebrews who were in South America were of the tribe of Reuben. But the people who were there, as far as like the main people who made up the area, they were Indians as well. But they were not the same tribe as these, 3 man and woman there, right? And I will next week, it'll probably be next week, when I talk about the individual tribe of Reuben and show that this was just a remnant of the tribe of Reuben. This was not the bulk of the tribe of Reuben in South America. This was just like a remnant who went down there, or maybe a family or two that went down there among the, as I will show, the Asherites. All right, so these Asherites were kind of fully gone off at this point, right? They were persecuting their brothers of a different tribe who were just a remnant there, all right? But he also said that Joseph was in the Caribbean, was in the islands in the Caribbean, all right? The day when they were at last to issue forth into the world was coming soon. They explained, but in the meantime, they could not allow visitors to cross over to them. They were willing to make an exception in the near future, however, on account of their need for education, for though they spoke Hebrew, they could not read or write it. So, and we'll see that later on as well, that most of the people over here did not have any written languages, all right? But they could speak their language, right? They could speak their language, but they couldn't write it, all right? Would Montesinos send them 12 bearded men to be their teachers? He said he would. The 4 strangers returned to their canoe, paddled back across the river, and disappeared from view. Francisco told Montesinos all he knew about the people from his own traditions. His ancestors, to their eternal shame, had indeed made war on them and persecuted them. You see that right there? So we see that all the time whenever you read the books of the Kings about how there were intertribal conflicts, and even among the books of the Judges, or the book of the Judges, I should say. There are intertribal conflicts all the time. All right, this is no different from what happened over here. All right. Only the sorcerers of his tribe had perceived that they were a special people, and had given warning that they should be left alone. The God of these children of Israel is the true God. All right, so even the pagans among the Asherites down there, they knew that, like, hey, look, these guys are right. They're the ones who really got it right. Their God is the actual God. Right. they had said, and everything inscribed on their tablets is true, right? So we even see that they had even some form of writing at some point, all right? But at that time, they had, lost the ability to read it and write it. And everything inscribed on their tablets is true. At the end of days, they will be lords of all the nations of the earth. One nation will come bringing many things to this land, and after we have all been provided for, these children of Israel will go forth from where they now are and reign over the whole earth as they once did. Right? So they knew the prophecy that the Israelites would take the kingdom in the last days. With this final flourish, Montezinos had turned his tale of the lost tribes into a bit of propaganda for the Dutch conquest of Brazil at the same time. You see that right there. So Montezinos, he took this tale back to the Dutch, and they used it as a means of conquering the people. And we'll see that with Montezinos, I believe he was an Israelite. He didn't mean to do that. But we will see that in this next book that we'll talk about. And this is The History of the American Indians by James Adair. All right, so we'll talk about this real quick. I'll try to get through it quick. I'm not gonna get in. I'm not gonna have enough time to get into any other tribal breakdowns other than like Gad. Probably I'll try to get through Gad because that's what James Adair is talking about here. Come on now. I clicked on this, open it up. My computer's real slow, y'all. Y'all forgive me. So let me just get rid of this because I'm not going to be talking about the tribes anymore other than Gad. Come on now. Might just have to get rid of this as well because it's taking up too much time. Yeah, get rid of that as well. It's taking up too much time. Where are we at? Come on now, open it up. I want to show y'all the cover of the book, and then we'll get into the pages in the book. This whole book, it's good. It's a good book. So, let's zoom out so y'all can see this. So, The History of the American Indians by James Adair. All right. So, James Adair, he was not no Hebrew Israelite. All right. This was a British Edomite who came over here to the land to try to figure out who these native people were, so that he could further the British colonies. All right, that was his whole purpose. His purpose was not to help the people over here. His purpose was not to, because he, as we're about to see, he lived in the 1700s, and he was just trying to keep the British Empire going. That was his whole purpose. So it says, the history of the American Indians, particularly those nations adjoining to the Mississippi, East and West Florida, Georgia, South and North Carolina, and Virginia, containing an account of their origin, language, manners, religious and civil customs, laws, forms of government, punishments, conduct in war and domestic life, their habits, diet, agriculture, manufactures, diseases, and method of cure, and other particulars, sufficient to render it a complete Indian system, with observations on former historians, the conduct of our colony governors, superintendents, missionaries, etc. Also, an appendix containing a description of the Floridas and the Mississippi lands with their productions, the benefits of colonizing Georgiana, which later became Georgia, and civilizing the Indians, and the way to make all the colonies more valuable to the mother country, with a new map of the country referred to in the history. Right, so, and then it says by James Adair, Esquire, a trader with the Indians and resident to their country for 40 years, right? So they sent, the British sent James Adair over here to figure out what is going on among the Indians, who are they? We want to know how to take their land and colonize the entire region. So that's what James Adair was attempting to find out, all right? Because you can't overcome your enemy unless you know who they are, right? So he said, look, and you read the appendix, and he is basically just saying that, like, hey, look, here's how you can keep the colonies happy. Here's what you can do for and to the Indians. So as he said here, what did he say? Civilize the Indians, right? Make them more like British people. So this is not like somebody who is like trying to posture, oh, we need to convert these Indians or like for their benefit, or that, you know, oh, they're righteous and holy people. That's not his case that he's trying to make at all. All right, understand this. His biases is completely towards the British Empire at the time. He lived in the 1700s. All right. But yeah, I'm not going to get into the appendix necessarily, but y'all get this book, because the whole book, he's describing the culture and the history of the so-called Native Americans and describing how and why he believes that they are Israelites. All right. And the appendix, you read the appendix and he's like, hey, look, here, as I just described earlier, you know, hey, here's the type of crops that the colonies are producing. Here's how to keep them happy. Here's how to do this and that. Again, trying to further the British Empire. All right. So that's the here's the preface. That was just like the subheading, basically. The explanation of what the book is. This is the preface. So he says, the following history and observations are the production of one who had been chiefly, here we go. Chiefly engaged in an Indian life ever since the year 1735. And most of the pages were written among our old friendly Chickasaw, with whom I first traded in the year 1744. So you can see like when all this takes place. All right, in the mid 1700s, before the American Revolution even. Subjects are interesting as well as amusing, but never with a literary work begun and carried on with more disadvantages. The author was separated by his situation from the conversation of the learned and from any libraries, right? So he fully immersed himself with, you know, the quote-unquote Indians. The author was separated by his situation from the conversation of the learned and from any libraries, excuse me. I just read that. Frequently interrupted also by business and obliged to conceal his papers through the natural jealousy of the natives. The traders' letters of correspondence always excited their suspicions and often gave offense. Another difficulty I had to encounter was the secrecy and closeness of the Indians as to their own affairs and their prying disposition into those of others, so that there is no possibility of retirement among them, right? So he's like, I got to keep all my work secret. I'm always hiding it from them because I don't want them to know the true nature of why I'm here, right? So he was always trying to keep it from them, like he was always on the move, basically. A view of the disadvantages of my situation made me reluctant to comply with the earnest and repeated solicitations of many worthy friends to give the public an account of the Indian nations with whom I had long resided, was so intimately connected, and of whom scarcely anything had yet been published but romance and a mass of fiction, right? So he's like, I'm not trying to romanticize anything. And I've separated myself from friends and colleagues who want to be among them. I'm solely here for my duty for, you know, his nation, his empire that he's trying to preserve. All right. So he said, my friends at last prevailed, and on pursuing the sheets, they were pleased to approve the contents as conveying true information and general entertainment. Having no ambition to appear in the world as an author, and knowing that my history differed essentially from all former publications of the kind, I first resolved to suppress my name. My friends advised me to own the work, and thus it is tendered to the public in the present form. You see it right there. So he's like, look, I'm not trying to, I wasn't even trying to put my name out there. I was trying to, you know, present it anonymously, but my friends told me, hey, put your name on it. And, you know, so people know who did it. All right. The performance had doubtless imperfections. Humanum est errare. I don't know what that means. He said, I'm only human, perhaps. Some readers may think there is too much of what relates to myself and of the adventures of small parties among the Indians and traders, but minute circumstances are often of great consequence, especially in discovering the descent and genius of a people, describing their manners and customs, and giving proper information to rulers at a distance. I thought it better to be esteemed prolix than to omit anything that might be useful on these points. Some repetitions which occur were necessary. The history of several Indian nations being so intermixed with each other and their customs so nearly alike. You see it right there. So he said, I did repeat myself, but only when it was necessary. All right. One great advantage my readers will here have, I sat down to draw the Indians on the spot, had them many years standing before me, and lived with them as a friend and brother. My intentions were pure when I wrote. Truth hath been my standard. I have no sinister nor mercenary views in publishing. With inexpressible concern, I read several imperfect and fabulous accounts of the Indians, already given to the world. Fiction and conjecture have no place in the following pages, right? So he said, I ain't making none of this up. Though he said he has no sinister or mercenary views. I mean, yeah, right. He himself didn't attack any of the people that he mentioned, but his whole purpose was that to appease the British Empire. So make of that what you will. The public may depend on the fidelity of the author and that his descriptions are genuine, though perhaps not so polished and romantic as other Indian histories and accounts they may have seen. My grand objects were to give the literati proper and good materials for tracing the origin of the American Indians and to incite the higher powers zealously to promote the best interest of the British colonies and of the mother country. There you go. So he's not hiding his biases. His biases have nothing to do with the Indians. His biases are towards the British colonies and of the mother country, as he stated. All right, he was a loyalist, as people who know of American Revolutionary terms would say. All right, American colonists who were loyal to the British Crown. That's who he was. For who's, or maybe he was even from Britain, because speaking like this, it seems like he was possibly even from Britain directly, right? But, he lived over here for 40 years at least. For whose greatness and happiness I have the most ardent desires. The whole of the work is respectfully submitted to the candor and judgment of the impartial public, right? So he said, I'm just putting it out there so y'all know, all right? So I skipped over a little bit. This is page, 12? Come on now. It's taking too long to pull up these. What page is this? Is that on the bottom, right? Yeah, this is page 12. All right. So, observation of the origin and descent of the Indians. The very remote history of all nations is disfigured with fable and gives but little encouragement to distant inquiry and laborious researches. Much of the early history and antiquities of nations is lost, and some people have no records at all, and to this day are rude and uncivilized, yet a knowledge of them is highly interesting and would afford amusement and even instruction in the most polished times to the most polite. So I'm going to jump on down. Let's see, because it's already been an hour, so I'm trying to get to the point here. So let's see. I'll jump down to this paragraph here. Their language is copious and very expressive for their narrow orbit of ideas and full of rhetorical tropes and figures like the Orientalist. In early times when languages were not so copious, rhetoric was invented to supply that defect. And what barrenness then forced them to custom now continues as an ornament. Formerly at a public meeting of the headmen and chief orators of the Choctaw Nation, I heard one of their eloquent speakers deliver a very pathetic, elaborate, allegorical, tragic oration in the high praise and for the great loss of their great judicious war chieftain, Shulasham Mashtabay, our daring, brave friend, Red Shoes. The orator compared him to the sun that enlightens and enlivens the whole system of created beings, and having carried the metaphor to a considerable length, he expatiated on the variety of evils that necessarily result from the disappearance and absence of the sun. With a great deal of judgment and propriety of expression, he concluded his oration with the same trope with which he began, right? So James Adair is like, oh, good Lord, he's comparing him to the sun, and he kept going, whatever. They often change the sense of words into a different signification from the natural, exactly after the manner also of the Orientalist. Even their common speech is full of it. Like the prophetic writings and the book of Job, their orations are concise, strong, and full of fire, which sufficiently confutes the wild notion that some have espoused of the North American Indians being pre-Adamites, or a separate race of men created for that continent. That disproves, or first of all, he disproves the idea that these people aren't listed in the Bible. All right, so he says, look, there are definitely people that's listed in the Bible because they speak similar to biblical orations. All right, what stronger circumstantial proofs can be expected than that they, being disjointed from the rest of the world, time immemorial, and destitute also of the use of letters, should have and still retain the ancient standard of speech conveyed down by oral tradition from father to son to the present generation, besides their persons, customs, etc., are not singular from the rest of the world, which probably they would were they not were they not descended from one and the same common head. You see that right there. So he said, look, they're similar to the rest of the world, and they would be different if they were pre-Adamites, right? Their notions of things are like ours, and their organical structure is the same. And then the soul governs the body according to the common laws of God and the creation of Adam. God employed 6 days in creating the heavens, the earth, or the heavens, this earth, and the innumerable species of creatures, wherewith it is so amply furnished. The works of being infinitely perfect must entirely answer the design of. Let's see what he continues to say here. Come on now. There we go. Them. The design of them. Hence, there could be no necessity for a second creation of God's, or God's creating many pairs of the human race differing from each other and fitted for different climates, because that implies imperfection in the grand scheme or a want of power in the execution of it. Had there been a prior or later formation of any new class of creatures, they must materially differ from those of the 6 days of work, for it is inconsistent with divine wisdom to make a vain or unnecessary repetition of the same act. But the American Indians neither vary from the rest of mankind in their internal construction nor external appearance, except in color, right? He said they only look a little different than other peoples. They pretty much are the same as the rest of everybody else, which, as has been shown, is either entirely accidental or artificial. As the Mosaic account declares, a completion of the manifestations of God's infinite wisdom and power in creation within that space of time, it follows that the Indians have lineally descended from Adam, the first and the great parent of all the human species. Both the Chickasaw and Choctaw Indians call a deceitful person a sinte, a snake, and they frequently say they have not sinte sulish, the snake's tongue, the meaning of which is very analogous to a name the Hebrews gave to a deceitful person, which probably proceeded from a traditional knowledge of Eve's being beguiled by the tempter in that shape, right? So James Adair is not even making the case that, he's not even connecting the dots here, that Eve was beguiled by a sinte, right? A deceitful person, a snake, right? He's saying, the tempter literally took that shape. For the Indians, never affix any bad idea to the present reptile fraternity, except that of poisonous teeth. And they never use any such metaphor as that of a snake's teeth, right? So he said the language of metaphors and comparison is that of the Hebrews, all right? Some have supposed the Americans to be descended from the Chinese, right? That's the prominent theory today, that the people over here crossed the Bering Strait from Asia, and that all the people over here just descended from Asians, right? But neither their religion, laws, customs, etc. agree in the least with those of the Chinese. He said, look, they're too different from the Asians to be descended from them, all right? Which sufficiently proves that they are not of that line. He said they have nothing to do with the Asians. They're not comparable to the Asians at all. So they can't be descended from those people of Asia, all right? They look a little bit like them because, again, as we read earlier, they mixed themselves among the people, all right? The Asians used to be right there with the Hebrews as far as in the Middle East, all right? But he said, look, they can't be of the Asians because their religion, laws, and customs aren't like them at all right? Besides, as our best ships are now are almost a half a year in sailing to China or from thence to Europe, it is very unlikely they should attempt such dangerous discoveries in early time with their supposed small vessels against rapid currents and in dark and sickly monsoons, especially as it is very probable they were unacquainted with the use of lodestone or to direct their course. China is above 8,000 miles distant from the American continent, which is twice as far as across the Atlantic Ocean, right? So so he is not even giving the Bering Strait theory any credence at all. He said, look, they would not be able to sail over here from Asia, right? let's see, twice as far as across the Atlantic Ocean, and we are not informed by any antient writer of their maritime skill or so much as any inclination that way, besides small coasting voyages, right? So he said they did move around over here, but not nowhere near as much as to cross the Pacific Ocean. The winds blow likewise with little variation from east to west, within the latitudes of 30 and odd north and south, and therefore they could not drive them on the American coast, it lying directly contrary to such course. Neither could persons fail to America from the north by way of Tartary or ancient Scythia, that from its situation never was or can be a maritime power. He said right there, so he said there's not Tartaria, or whatever people say these days. Ancient Scythians are pretty much still in like Kazakhstan, that region. That from its situation never was or can be a maritime power, and it's utterly impracticable for any to come to America by sea from that quarter. Besides the remaining traces of their religious ceremonies and civil and martial, I'm pretty sure it means marital there, customs are quite opposite to like vestiges of the old Scythians. He said, look, they're not comparable to the old Scythians, nor even in the modern northern climates is to be seen the least vestige of any ancient stately buildings or of any thick settlements, as are said to remain in the less healthy regions of Peru and Mexico. Several of the Indian nations assure us they crossed the Mississippi, so keep that in mind. The people that he talked to said they crossed the Mississippi from west to east before they made their present northern settlements, which connected with the former arguments will sufficiently explode that weak opinion of the American Aborigines being lineally descended from the Tartars or ancient Scythians. It is a very difficult thing to divest ourselves, not to say other persons, of prejudices and favorite opinions, and I expect to be censured by some for opposing commonly received sentiments or for meddling with the dispute agitated among the learned ever since the first discovery of America. He said, look, I expect to get some pushback off of this, but truth is my object, and I hope to offer some things which, if they do not fully solve the problem, may lead the way and enable others possessing stronger judgment, more learning, and more leisure to accomplish it. As I before suggested, where we have not the light of history or records to guide us through the dark maze of antiquity, we must endeavor to find it out by probable arguments, and in such subjects of inquiry, where no material objections can be raised against probability, it is strongly conclusive of the truth and nearly gives the thing solved for. From the most exact observations I can make in the long time I treaded among the Indian Americans, I was forced to believe them lineally descended from the Israelites. He said, genealogically, they come from the ancient Israelites. Either while they were a maritime power, as we talked about last week with the Israelite-Phoenician connection, or soon after the general captivity. The latter, however, is the most probable, and that's the one that I stick to, the second Esdras time period, all right? Or rather, the second Esdras 13 time period, all right, that it details after the general captivity, when all the Israelites were freed by Cyrus, all right? This descent I shall endeavor to prove to prove from their religious rites, civil and I'm pretty sure it means marital here and not martial. Customs, their marriages, or maybe it could be martial, but I don't know. Their martial, I'll just read it as martial. Their martial customs, their marriages, funeral ceremonies, manners, language, traditions, and a variety of particulars, which will at the same time make the reader thoroughly acquainted with nations of which it may be said to this day very little have been known, right? So he said, like, nobody really knows about these people until I went out here and did this, all right? And his conclusion that he came to was that these people were biologically and lineally, as he stated, from Jacob, from the Israelites. Right? He says observations and arguments and proof of the American Indians being descended from the Jews, and that's how most of the book goes. Argument 1, argument 2, argument 3, argument 4, and he talks about these different nations. All right, as far as Chickasaw, Shawnee, Choctaw. Who else talk about? Cherokee, Seminoles. Talk about all these different people. The Creek, I think, as well. A number of particulars present themselves in favor of a Jewish descent, but to form a true judgment and draw a solid conclusion, the following arguments must not be partially separated. Let them be distinctly considered. then unite them together and view their force collectively. I'm not going to go through all the arguments that are in the book. Y'all get the book, check it out. I'll just touch a couple from the first few pages. As the Israelites were divided into tribe and had chiefs over them, so the Indians divide themselves. Each tribe forms a little community within the nation, as the nation hath its particular symbol. So hath each tribe the badge from which it is denominated. All right. So it goes on to say down here at the bottom of the page, I do just want to point this out, that many of the ancient heathens followed the Jewish custom of dividing themselves into tribes or families. So that of itself is not enough. But understand that you take all these things together and you put them as one. All right. It says they have families of the eagle, panther, tiger, buffalo, family of the bear, deer, raccoon, tortoise, snake, fish, and likewise of the wind, right? So that's what we see among the ancient Israelites as well. They had their symbol, their seals, right? There is no tribe or individual among them, however, called by the name Opossum, which is with the Cherokee stilled Sequoia, and with the Chickasaw and Choctaw Indians Shuka. Synonyms with that of a hog, right? So certain unclean beasts they would just stay from entirely. This may be more material than at first appears, as our natural history tells us that the opossum is common in other parts of the world. Several of the old Indians assure us they formerly reckoned it as a filthy, uneatable animal, as a hog, although they confess. And we know by long observation that from the time our traders settled among them, they are every year more corrupt in their morals, right? So each year we get further and further from the Lord. So that is how we could have come over here to keep the commandments, right? But then over time, the people fell off, right? Not only in this instance of eating an impure animal, but in many other religious customs of their forefathers, right? So throughout time, they stray further and further away from the customs of the forefathers, meaning the laws of God. All right. So that's how you can have the certain tribes like Reubenites that just so happen to be in South America among the Asherites who had already fallen off, right? But you had others who were still keeping the commandments. When we consider the various revolutions these unlettered savages are likely to have undergone among themselves through a long forgotten measure of time, and that probably they have been above 20 centuries without the use of letters to convey down their traditions, it cannot be reasonably expected they should still retain the identical names of their primogenial tribes. You see that right there? So he said they've been over here for about 20 centuries at least. So they've lost their way, right? So and this will probably be the last one because I do want to get into this other book that I have as well. By a strict, permanent, divine precept, the Hebrew nation were ordered to worship at Jerusalem, Jehovah, the true and living God, and who by the Indians is stilled Yehovah, right, which is actually the first three letters of, when you say those three letters, in the Hebrew they were Yod, He, and Wah, right? The last one would be another He, all right? So let's see if there's anything on this page. Not particularly, I don't think. Because from there, we'll move to this other book. So I'll skip down to this paragraph. It says the ceremonies. The ceremonies of the Indians in their religious worship are more after the Mosaic institution than of pagan imitation. You see them right there. So he said, look, they're not really pagan. They're closer to the Mosaic institution, which could not be if the majority of the old natives were of heathenish descent. For all bigots and enthusiasts will fight to death for the very shadow of their superstitious worship, when they have even lost all the substance. There yet remain so many marks as to enable us to trace the Hebrew extraction and rites through all the various nations of Indians, and we may with a great deal of probability conclude that if any heathens accompanied them to the American world or were settled in it before them, they became proselytes of justice, and their pagan rites and customs were swallowed up in the Jewish. To illustrate the general subject, I shall give the Indian opinion of some of the heathen gods contrasted with that of the pagan. You see that right there. So he said, look, there's some pagan worship over here, but it's of Mosaic institution, all right? Meaning custom and tradition. From there. Let's talk about Gad specifically. As far as the people touching down over here. Let's it wouldn't be in maps. I don't know why I clicked on that. Let's go to the pictures. And we'll go to Discovery of Ancient America by David Allen Deal. This is this book right here. This is one of the covers. I've seen some other covers as well, but this is the one that I got. The one that I got here recently. It says Discovery of Ancient America, and then down here you see David Allen Deal. I guess I didn't take a good picture. I left out his name. But anyway, what page is this? This is. I've talked about this on stream before when talking about the guides, but this needs to be noted, needs to be stated. So at this mountain here, it's called Hidden Mountain. You scroll down. In the center of the picture is the Ten Commandment inscription on the lower right hand of the large. Wait a minute. It said, view of Hidden Mountain. In the center of the picture is the Ten Commandment inscription on the lower right hand corner of the large fallen outcropping. So I guess that'd be over here. But here you have it. Here you have the Ten Commandments, and as you said down here, the Ten Commandments of Yahweh. On the stone found, this is in Los Lunes, New Mexico. All right. I believe this is about to describe it here in this on this page. All right. Let's see if it'll pull it up. There we go. It says the secret of Hidden Mountain on the right bank of the Rio Puercos, some 30 miles southwest of Albuquerque in the brown, barren waste of Valencia County, New Mexico, stands a volcanic mesa. The people in the general area call it Hidden Mountain or Mystery Mountain, but the Indians retain its more ancient title, Cerro Los Moquino, Cliff of the Strange Writings. These names aptly apply, for upon its slopes, a secret is revealed that, if accepted, would change the basic concepts upon which ancient American history is built. Few even dare its challenge. Nevertheless, the emerging evidence compels us to conclude that this wilderness region was in ancient times visited by adventurers from the Middle East. Atop these natural volcanic ramparts is found the ancient ruins of a camp laid out in military fashion, that is, in a perimeter of small 1 or 2 man dugouts, which are called by some pit houses. I'm not necessarily interested in reading that whole paragraph there, but it does say ample water is available less than a quarter mile away from either the Carrizo Wash or the Rio Puercos. The Rio Puercos is a tributary of the Rio Grande, which flows into the Gulf of Mexico. All right, so and provides a natural highway to or from Hidden Mountain and the sea. You see it right there. So if people sailed up into the Gulf of Mexico, they could sail up into the Rio Grande, which would take them up the Rio Puercos, which would land them at Los Lunes, New Mexico, or thereabouts. All right. So it says, at first one might casually dismiss these ruins as some relic of a band of ancient Indians that roamed the area, but closer examination of the details makes such a conclusion patently amiss. Comparison of the building formations with other Indian sites proves them unique in the Americas, but surprisingly similar to finds in the Middle East. And I'm going to show you with the next artifact on here that it's not even unique in the Americas. There's a lot of different Hebrew artifacts in the Americas. All right. Yet the greatest shock, causing much disbelief and offhanded accusations of fraud, comes from the accompanying inscriptions found at the site. Lying along the winding trail leading to the campsite on top of the mountain juts a fallen outcropping of native igneous basalt. On its face is carved an inscription in ancient letters. Another short inscription is found at the summit of the mountain. The words chiseled on these rocks are without a doubt ancient Hebrew. The greater inscription recites the Ten Commandments. The smaller one reads, Yahweh is our mighty one. All right. The ramifications of these words, if authentically composed by an ancient scribe, are enormous, giving direct proof that a connection anciently existed between the Americas through explorations of mariners with the Middle East. The evidence would tend to indicate naval power for some countries as early as 3,500 years ago. All right, so it wouldn't be 3,500 years ago; it'd be 2,500, because 3,500 years ago would be even before David. And that wouldn't make much sense. It is within this framework that we must examine the 10 Commandments of New Mexico. All right. So this next picture is the comparisons between the writings on the stone and the 10 Commandments written in Hebrew, or rather, this just transcribes what's written on the stone. Yes. So this just transcribes what's written on stone. The lettering style, the language and translation of the text is what we're trying to figure out based on what these writings are. All right. Inscription rock, mystery rock. So he just wrote it down on a page so we can see it a little better. All right. What is this next one? Okay. What is this next one? Okay, so this shows pretty much the same thing. Missing section with particular letters. All right, so various unsupported opinions about the meaning of Inscription Rock have been advanced over the years. Some attributed to the Mormons, who, out of some fraudulent attempt to prove that the American Indians were descendants of Israelites, placed the writings so as to be found as proof of their religious theory. When most Mormons would not even know how to write in the Paleo-Hebrew, right? None of them would have any kind of information on how to do that. Another pronounced inscription to be a Greek Cypriot fantasy by totally disregarding known alphabets, juggling letters by adding strokes and many consonants, thereby placing it so far from any scholarly pursuit that one can only label it unfortunate. Most of these opinions are based upon mere conjectures formulated out of a lack of adequate information, data much more readily available today to everyone. The letters of the inscription, cut deeply and accurately in very hard, flinty, igneous rocks, are by no means a mystery. They are clearly and unequivocally a form of Paleo-Hebrew. A comparison of alphabets easily proves the point. And he's about to compare these alphabets. Now, I do want to keep this pulled up, and I'll pull up some other images as well. Because looking into another artifact before we get into the scriptures again, I want to keep this up here. All right, so this is the modern Hebrew over here to the left, the Assyrian style text, Roman letters as far as like English is concerned, and then the Paleo-Hebrew, and then the inscriptions on the rock. So you see what the Paleo-Hebrew looks like, and it's pretty much identical to the inscription on the rock, except handwriting, right? So handwriting would dictate that a yod is not necessarily tilted, but this person just writes a yod down, and he kind of writes m's upside down, or mems. He has his own way of writing a Q, right? He writes like an hourglass instead of like what we know as a Q. But pretty much everything else is the same. He writes his tzaz. His taza is a little different. Some people say taza, some people say tza. Writes there is a little different. Tzade, I should say. Tzade is a little different. Other than that, it's pretty much the same, except for I guess you get it down here to the Samek, it's a little different. And your Khe is more like a modern H, instead of like the Paleo-Hebrew is like a double H. But other than that, it's pretty much the same. It's just his handwriting is a little different than what you would expect from like a specific and like perfect Paleo-Hebrew. It's not like perfect Paleo-Hebrew. It's like handwriting is changed a little bit, and the language evolved a little bit for this individual writer. That's pretty much the only difference. And when you compare the Paleo-Hebrew with the writing on the rock, it pretty much turns out to be exactly the 10 Commandments. So it says the Los Lunas New Mexico inscription rock is a precise rendering of the 10 Commandments. This fact is poignantly made in an interlinear comparison using Paleo-Hebraic form found at Hidden Mountain with the modern Hebrew form in the Masoretic text and an English translation. Note, Hebrew is read from right to left, right? So that's why he has it written like this. So right here up at the top, you have what's written on the inscription mountain. Then here you have the modern Hebrew, and then the English down under that. All right. Yeah. Yeah. So he goes on. It goes on to say literally what the Ten Commandments say. Right. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I got you. Yeah. So I was just wondering. So like that's the name Yahweh, right? As he has right there, Yahweh. So yeah, pretty much. He pretty much proves here with this book that the Ten Commandments were found in Los Lunas, New Mexico, right off the Rio Grande. Pretty much evidence that people came up here and wrote down the Ten Commandments on the Rio Grande. All right, so let's get that in prophecy. All right, let's get that in prophecy. Considering the tribe of Gad. All right. It says, and of Gad, he said, blessed be he that enlargeth Gad. Right? So Gad had 7 sons, just like there are 7 different tribes of indigenous here in the North American area, not including the Creek/Seminole family. All right. And of course, you have the Toltec family, which I'm not counting either. That would be Issachar. But that's why you may look at like the 12 tribes chart when it says, hey, the Seminole Creek family Indians are the Reubenites, and all the rest of the Native Americans are Gadites. Well, why is that the case? Because blessed be he that enlargeth Gad. He gave him a large area. He gave him many sons. He dwelled as a lion and teareth the arm with the crown of the head. All right, so that would be your blood brother pact, as the chiefs would make, right, with their feathered crown, the crown of the head. And he provided the first part for himself, right? America, the United States, I should say, is the best part, right? He provided it for himself because there, in a portion of the lawgiver, was he seated, right? So Gad acted as the priest on this side, all right? And he came with the heads of the people. He executed the justice of the Lord and his judgments with Israel. All right. So that's why when Gad got over here, he kept the commandments. All right. In Deuteronomy 11, and also in Deuteronomy 6 to a certain extent, talking about this, write these laws upon your gates. Right. But in Deuteronomy 11, it says, and starting with 29, and it shall come to pass when the Lord thy God hath brought thee in unto the land, whither thou goest to possess it, that thou shalt put the blessing upon Mount Gerizim and the curse upon Mount Ebal. Are they not on the other side Jordan, by the way where the sun goeth down, in the land of the Canaanites, which dwell in the Champaign over against Gilgal, by the plains of Moab? For ye shall pass over Jordan to go and to possess the land, which the Lord your God giveth you, and ye shall possess it and dwell therein, and ye shall observe to do all these statutes and judgments, which I said before you this day, right? So when they got there, they wrote down the laws of God at the base of the mountain, right? That's what the guys did to show the blessings that God would give them, all right? And more specifically, I guess, in Deuteronomy 6. Like I said, written on the gates. Yeah, so this is Deuteronomy 6 and 9, and thou shalt write them upon the posts of thy house and on thy gates, right? So you got to the land, write these on the base of the mountain, write these upon the gates, right? So that's what they did. They sat down in the land. They went up the Rio Grande. They got settled. They wrote them down, and then as where did I read that? It said they crossed the Mississippi. I believe that was James Adair that we were reading. It said that they crossed the Mississippi. But one more thing here, and I'm gonna let y'all go because it's been an hour and a half. Let me read this. And Feats and Wisdom of the Ancients. That's right. So I showed y'all this book last week, but there's another part of the book that I want to bring out. So I talked about this with the Paraiba stone last week. There's another artifact that was actually found in Tennessee, All right. So it's Feats and Wisdom of the Ancients by Time Life Books. All right, that's the cover. This is the Bat Creek Stone. All right. That was found in I believe it's Bat Creek, Tennessee. I believe that's where it got its name. The ancient Hebrews of Tennessee. It says, throughout the river valleys of the southeastern United States lie hundreds of man-made earthen mounds in which American Indians laid their dead to rest. But in one such mound, according to some researchers, there are non-Indian remains as well, the bones of Jewish refugees who may have fled the brutal Roman occupation of Palestine in the 1st century AD. And I've pretty much sufficiently made the case that that's not who that is. All right, that's they had come over here before them. All right. This tomb first came to light in 1889 when a team from the Smithsonian Institution excavated three burial mounds along Bat Creek in Loudoun County, Tennessee. I mean, it could be that they come over here. Most of those who escaped the Roman persecution just like fled into Africa and stuff. I pretty much made that case whenever I talked about Judah. Let's see. 9 skeletons were found in one mound, 2 of them set apart from the other 7. Beneath one of these 2 skeletons lay several unusual artifacts, among them a stone tablet bearing 9 carved letters. The director of the mound excavation project, a man by the name of Cyrus Thomas, decided that the inscription contained letters of the Cherokee alphabet, which had been devised around 1820 by the Cherokee scholar Sequoyah. Right, so he said, oh, these must be Cherokee letters. The bones in the tablet were sent to the Smithsonian for later consideration. Thomas published his report in 1894, and there the matter seemed to rest. But in the 1950s, archaeologist Joseph Mann happened upon a picture of the Bat Creek tablet and reached a conclusion remarkably more exotic than Thomas's. I believe I have a book by Joseph Mann, too. I'm going to have to look into that. Mann knew the Cherokee alphabet and said, as he wrote later, could see no relationship whatever between the symbols on the stone and those developed by Sequoyah, right? Because the Cherokee, as James Adair said, like many other tribes over here, they had a spoken language, and I guess this is going back to what Ronald Sanders said as well, that they had a spoken language, but not a written language. All right. What man did see upon turning the picture of the stone upside down was a striking similarity between several of the letters in ancient Canaanite writing, right? So the Phoenician, the Paleo-Hebrew language. No expert in Semitic languages, man sent a photograph to Semitic language scholar Cyrus Gordon, the same guy who confirmed that the Paraiba stone was legit. Who confirmed Mann's observation. The characters, said Gordon, were from a Hebrew dialect dating to about the 1st century AD. They translated as a comet of the Jews. He speculated that one of the skeletons was that of a leader, the comet memorialized by the tablet. Others who have compared the inscription with Cherokee, Paleo-Hebrew, and English characters take the position that, on the basis of their shapes, the carvings are as similar to English letters as to Cherokee letters, but are even more like Hebrew, as Gordon said. So everyone who sees this says, yeah, that looks like Hebrew, all right? And as we can see by this other one, when you see the Paleo-Hebrew letters, let me bring this down. When you see the Paleo-Hebrew letters here, you can see that right there, that one is clearly a yod, right? You can see that over here. It says Paleo-Hebrew, the ancient Aramaic. That's clearly a yod. That is a hay right next to it. I don't know what that other one would be. Perhaps an aleph or a ta. Down there on the end could be a resh. What am I looking at? It doesn't look like a bet. It looks more like a resh. Where's a resh? Yeah, it could be a bet, could be a resh. So that's what's presented there. Perhaps a samek down there on the bottom. Those could just be wear and tear marks. But yeah, clearly with a yod right in the middle. That's Hebrew letters. Support for Gordon's assessment also comes from carbon 14 dating of wood fibers found with the skeletons. The test revealed that the bodies were buried sometime in the first 2 centuries AD. right? So, sometime in the first 2 centuries AD, those people were buried with that Hebrew writing on that stone, right? To be sure, there are many reasons to question the scenario suggested by Gordon's translation of the inscription. For example, the other artifacts recovered at the Back Creek gravesite are clearly American Indian rather than Hebraic, right? So, again, you had some people over here who retained the culture, some people fell off from it, and over time, everybody fell off from it, right? And there is, of course, no hint in voluminous Hebrew lore of how any ancient Hebrews might have come to be among the Indians of Tennessee 1900 years ago, except there is when you read 2 Esdras 13, as I postured tonight, as I had proven tonight and last week, that, yeah, the scriptures do talk about people coming over here, all right? So I guess I'll finish up talking about Gad before we close it out. And Lord's will, next week, I can finish up talking about the rest of the tribes. But in verse 19, it says, Gad, a troop shall overcome him. Right, that would be the U.S. Cavalry, the F troop. Right, but he shall overcome at the last. Right, so Andrew Jackson overcome the Gadites, but as the scripture says, he shall overcome at the last. When you read Revelation 7, Gad is among the 144,000. So with that, hope y'all learned something. I'm gonna go ahead and close it out with Mark 14. And yeah, there's a lot of extra biblical sources, so to speak. But when using the Bible as the foundation, you can use these other books just to further prove what the Most High has already given us. All right. Because some people are more convinced when they see secular stuff as opposed to just reading the Word. You can read the Word to them, and they'll be like, well, I don't know. But then you show them these secular sources, and they'll be like, oh, okay, now it's all starting to make sense. But in Mark 14, starting with 3, and being in Bethany in the house of Simon the leper, as he sat at meat, there came a woman having an alabaster box of ointment of spikenard very precious, and she brake the box and poured it on his head. And there were some that had indignation within themselves, and said, why was this waste of ointment made? For it might have been sold for more than 300 pence, and have been given to the poor. And they murmured against her. And Jesus said, let her alone, why trouble ye her? She hath wrought a good work on me. For ye have the poor with you always, and whensoever ye will, ye may do them good. But me ye have not always. She hath done what she could. She has come beforehand to anoint my body to the burying. Verily I say unto you, wheresoever this gospel shall be preached throughout the whole world, this also that she hath done shall be spoken of for a memorial of her. So with that, all praise to the Most High for that sister doing a wonderful thing for our Lord. And I hope y'all learned something. If y'all gotta go back and watch it to get all the sources and stuff, I obviously don't mind. Y'all go back and do that. Get these books. A lot of them you can find PDF versions for, so you might want to do that. But take your screenshots and whatnot if you would prefer to do that as well. That also helps. That's why I try to show the cover as well. And then y'all can go back later and try to get them. But with that, I say shalom and let God be magnified.